Hey guys, Lord Pudge here, bringing you part 2 of our series, Journey Through the Rulebook. Today we're going to be covering card types, so without further ado, let's get into it. So as discussed in part 1, cards are broken up into a few categories in this game. We have the Atlas, which is our sites, and then we have our spellbook, which is going to hold our minions, artifacts, auras, and magics, pretty much everything not included in our Atlas. The golden rule is important to remember in this game because sometimes the text of a card does contradict this rulebook, so as the rule states, the card text always takes precedence. And the silver rule just pretty much states that some of the rules on some of these cards are going to be a bit shortened just to fit on the card. It says on here to use common sense and be cool. If you're looking for a bit more clarification than that on some of these cards, I would recommend checking out Curiosa.com. They have an FAQ under most cards. It is a database that's currently being built up, so it might not be in there. If you can't find it in there, another good source is going to be either the Discord, which is the best source I would recommend because you can throw your own questions into the question channel, and they are constantly being answered, or of course Reddit as well. So as discussed previously, our avatar essentially is us. As the rulebook states, it is our mortal connection to the realm, so everything has to be done through our avatar, and I'll explain that here in a little bit. Looking at our card in the bottom right here, we have our name in the middle, Avatar of Air. On the left side, we have our life, which is how much we can endure before getting to death's door. Remember, when you get to 0, you go to death's door. The game isn't quite over yet, and we explained that in the first video. And then on the right side, that's going to be our power rating, which is how much damage we do when hitting in combat. And down below, we have our text box, which is pretty much just going to describe the ability of the avatar. There are currently quite a few avatars that exist in the game already, so I'd recommend trying out each of them as each ability is a bit different. Looking down below, we see that all avatars are spellcasters, which means they can cast spells most often from your hand. It's important to remember that all cards in this game are considered spells, besides the sites which are in our Atlas. So our spellbook, everything in there is considered a spell and going to be casted by our spellcaster, which in this case is our avatar. There is a spellcaster keyword that's going to be on some of our minions, but that is important for magics, and we'll discuss that a bit later. And finally, avatars cannot be banished, burrowed, submerged, disabled, destroyed, or sacrificed. We haven't gone over a few of these yet, but just remember that if there are any cards that are asking you to select a unit and do this, the avatar is off limits and cannot be selected by these abilities. Alright, so looking at our sites, again, these are going to be in our Atlas. Our site is a locus of power within the realm that you may explore and exploit. Sites are usually played by activating your avatar's ability, though they may enter the realm in other ways as well. Sites can also be attacked by your opponent to cause your avatar to lose life, so make sure to defend them. And we discussed this a little bit in the previous video, but make sure to remember that sites essentially are an extension of yourself. So let's look at a few key characteristics of our sites. So as you can see in the picture, 1 is going to be our name, and 2 is going to be our rarity. Rarities can be broken up into common, exceptional, elite, and unique. Not only is rarity important for collecting, but it also tells us how many we can have max in our deck at all times. So looking at our chart on the screen, we can see that commons, if it's a common card, we can have 4 of those in our deck max. Exceptionals 3, elites 2, and uniques 1. Looking back at our example of our sites, we see number 3, which is going to be our elemental symbol that increases our elemental affinity. The rulebook states that you will harness this to use spells and abilities. Additionally, sites will provide you with mana, an important resource that you will need to play cards and to use abilities during your turn. And we'll go over that in a little more detail once we get to minions and magics. Also, sites have a game text box down there, and sites have 2 levels, surface and subsurface. In Sorcery, sites can be separated into 2 main types. Water sites are identified by the water threshold icon shown on the screen. All other sites are considered land sites, including sites with no threshold icons and rubble. Diving into our first spell, we have our minions. Our minions are our greatest allies, assisting us with unique abilities in offense and defense, and there are a few key characteristics on their cards that we do need to know. Looking at our example here on this page, we have a plumed Pegasus, so 1, that's going to be our name in the middle. On the right side, we have our power rating. On our minions, this is going to be both our attack and health, so it's going to be combined, so it's essentially a 3/3 minion. And then on the left side, we have a mana cost, which is how much mana is required to play this card, and then a elemental threshold, so those emblems again are our elements, and that's going to be how much elemental affinity we need to get this card out. Remember, it is our sites that provide both mana and elemental affinity. So in order to get the above card out, we would need 3 mana at minimum, and at least one of those would have to be an heir. Both of these requirements have to be fulfilled in order for you to play this card. So for example, if you happen to have 3 sites, but we're missing the heir affinity on one of your sites, you cannot play this card. Like our sites, minions have a type line that describe key things about that card, such as subtypes and rarity. Again, our rarity is going to determine how many of that card we can have in our deck max. Now, auras are a bit different, as they usually impact a large area within the realm, conferring boons or conditions within their reach. Like our other spells, each aura has a name in the middle, it has a mana cost on the left side, and it also has an elemental threshold right next to it. Auras also have a type line that describe key things about that card down below, such as rarity. Auras have a game text box that describes their abilities, just like our minions. We cast our auras very similar to how we cast our minions, using our mana to cast these along with our elemental affinity. So in order to get this specific card out, we would need 4 sites providing 4 mana, and at least 2 of those would have to be an earth affinity. If for whatever reason our sites did not provide the earth affinity, we cannot cast this, just as we talked about with our minions. Whereas our magics are typically a one-time use, auras last as long as the card states. And if the card doesn't state it, then it typically lasts until the game ends or is destroyed. It's also important to note that these cards are placed in between the grids on our map. Whereas magics are typically used right on top of a square or region, our auras are going to be placed in between and affect the sites around them. Down below we have our magics. Magics are transient spells that have immediate impact and then dissipate as soon as they resolve. So these are typically a one-time use. Like our other spells, our magics have a name in the middle, a mana cost on the left side, and then an elemental threshold. Casting these is identical to how we cast our minions and our auras. And down below, just like our other cards, we have our text box and our rarity, which dictates how many of those we can have in our deck max. Where magics differ is how they're casted and from where. So remember that in this game, our avatars are spellcasters, and then you're going to have keywords that tell us what minions are spellcasters. Magics have to be specifically casted by these spellcasters. This is very important for many reasons, as the spellcaster is the origination point of the magic itself. So looking at magics like Heat Ray, it says shoot a piercing projectile, deal 2 damage to 1 unit at each location along its path. That projectile starting point will be the spellcaster. It's important to note that magics can only hit minions and avatars within the same region. Our regions can be broken up into the void, which is the spaces not covered by sites yet, surface, and subsurface, which the subsurface is dependent upon what kind of site it is, so you have underwater and underground. Dependent on where the spellcaster resides, magics can only hit other minions and avatars within the same region. So for example, if you are utilizing your avatar as the primary spellcaster and are casting a magic from that avatar, you cannot hit underground minions as they are in a different region than the avatar who is on the surface. If the specific magic card says target or shoot a projectile like the one above, those words mean that it has to hit within the same region. There are magic cards out there that allow you to hit the entire region, which would hit all minions or avatars or units within that square. And last but not least, we have our artifacts. Artifacts are various relics, tools, gear, devices, etc. that are often charged with lasting enchantments by wizards of old. Artifacts have some key characteristics that we should know as well. Looking at our Spear of Destiny, we have our name in the middle. On the left side, we have a total mana cost, And then as you can see with our artifacts, we do not have an elemental threshold. Down below, we have our rarity, which again tells us how many we can have in our deck max, and then a text box describing the ability of the specific artifact. Our artifacts can be further broken down into subtypes, which include our weapons, relics, devices, armor, documents, automatons, and monuments. While most artifacts are standard objects that can be carried into battle, others, such as automatons and monuments, have some further characteristics and restrictions. And this is pretty easy to remember, as automatons are huge hulking creatures, and monuments are giant statues and things, so they cannot be carried. So artifacts can be picked up by either minions or our avatars and enhance their abilities. It is important to note that there is no limit to how many artifacts can be held by either a minion or an avatar, but just remember there are spells out there that hit either and completely destroy everything they are holding or force them to drop the items.
And that will wrap up our part 2 of Journey Through the Rulebook. So thank you guys so much for sticking around if you did to the end. Make sure to hit that like and subscribe. And as always, we will see you next time for part 3.